It seems more prudent than extravagant.
Well, we'll go ahead and call our meeting back to order. Welcome to everyone that's still with us here in the auditorium and for those online. Our next presentation will be Drought in California Agriculture. Ellen Hannock with the Public Policy Institute of California. Welcome, Ellen. Good to see you. Ellen is the Vice President and Director of the PPIC Water Policy Center and a Senior Fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California, where she holds the Ellen Hannock Chair in Water Policy. Under her leadership, the center has become a critical source of information and guidance for natural resource management in California. She has authored dozens of reports, articles, and books on water policy, including managing California's water. Her research is frequently profiled in the national media, and she participates in briefings, conferences, and interviews throughout the nation and around the world. So welcome, Ellen. Good to see you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Secretary and everyone on both commissions. Very, very good to see you. And I was really glad I got here for everybody's remarks this morning, because that set the stage really well for what I'm going to talk with you about. Those of you around the horseshoe have a couple of policy briefs that we released in the last couple of months. One of them is called Drought in Agriculture, and that's part of actually the work that Secretary Ross mentioned this morning that UC Merced has been engaged in. PPIC is partnering with the Merced team. And so there was a nice meaty technical analysis that came out first, and then we kind of distilled and massaged a little bit and drew some policy implications for that in that drought and agriculture piece. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and also a bit about a study that we came out with last month called Tracking Water Use in a Changing Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. That was in partnership with Greg Gartrell, who's known to many folks in the California water world. He's an adjunct fellow now with us at PPIC as part of his very busy retirement activities. I'm going to get right to it, and I tried to keep things in threes for you. So first, I'm going to talk just a little bit about three of the reasons why this drought feels different. Droughts are common in California. We have a, natural variability, feast and famine, flood and drought. But we definitely are seeing some things that are different. Some of these one could say are trends and things that we should be expecting to persist. Some might be just flukes. So it was really interesting to hear that just the previous panel. I think Frank was talking about. If you talk to old timers about some of this, and that no 1 year is the same, but it's clear that this drought is hitting Northern California really hard, in some unprecedented ways, and that is significant for Northern California, obviously, because you heard it. Entire irrigation districts are just not planting rice. Entire communities on the west side of the Sac Valley are going to be hit hard. But it's also very significant for the state as a whole, because Northern California is really normally our wetter part of the state, and it's kind of the reservoir for supplies to a lot of other parts of the state. And the rice growers have been really good partners with other parts of the state during past droughts, and they've been able to make some water available through the market. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of that this year. A little bit of kind of emergency supplies, transfers to some urban communities that need it, but not the kind of farm-to-farm kinds of partnerships that you normally see, and that we even saw a bit of, last year, to supply folks south of the Delta who are getting zero allocations. So that's one thing, and it's just important to keep in mind in terms of a region that is not used to getting hit hard like this, and so doesn't have all of the adaptive tools in place that places that are more used to getting very low allocations have. The second thing, and that first one, it's not a trend, right? We hope, I guess, but certainly the climate projections are not like putting a mark on Northern California and saying that we're expecting this region to get significantly less precipitation on average in the future than in the past. So we can hope that that's kind of that's going to not be a persistent situation, although it's certainly not great this year. The second one, this is a trend, and that's that droughts are getting hotter, and I think Secretary Ross talked about this a bit, and so did Nancy Vogel, Deputy Secretary for Resources, quoting Carla Nemeth, our Director of the Department of Water Resources, this idea that hotter droughts. I mean, we've known for a while that it was going to change the composition of snow and rain, and we're going to get more rain, which is hard for us because snowpack has been a sort of free place to store water for the irrigation months, right? And so that balance we kind of started to anticipate. What the research is showing now, and we've seen on the ground, is also just this thirst of the atmosphere, this higher ET, higher evaporative demand that is coming with temperature is a big part of it, drier air. That is also affecting the snowpack. It's just kind of, taking some of it up into the atmosphere. It's making the soils thirstier, it's making plants thirstier, and last year was just off the charts. There's a study that came out, I think in April, by a group, including some California researchers and some folks in Nevada at the Desert Research Institute, looking at evaporative demand trends across the West. And 2021 in California was just off the charts. What that means less snowpack, that means sort of more of your water gets used when you apply it, and it's wreaking havoc with our spring forecasts, which are key for figuring out, what do you announce to people as what kind of water allocation they're going to get. That depends on what you're expecting the snowpack and runoff to do. And we've missed that in the last drought, which was also hot and dry, and we've missed it, in this drought. So we've had to resort to emergency actions in the Delta watershed, basically just to try to keep salinity under some kind of control and try to manage cold water for salmon and meet some of the very minimal needs in terms of water supplies. Last year, I'm going to posit that it was kind of the year that we broke the Delta. And what I mean by that is that 100% of the runoff in the Delta watershed, so that's the entire Sacramento basin and the entire San Joaquin basin, was used either upstream or within the Delta itself. So all of the outflow out of the Delta under the Golden Gate Bridge and all of the Delta exports were, on average over the year, were supplied from the reservoirs upstream, which is just phenomenal. And if you look at the upstream depletion part, 84% of runoff never made it to the Delta. Now, when I say we sort of talk in the little brief, because it's intended for kind of a non-technical audience, we use the term use rather than depletions. If you look at the figure notes, you'll see we're talking about depletions. What that is diversions, subtracting out return flows, and what's kind of consumed by the natural vegetation and any net sort of additions to groundwater. In a dry year like this, probably the rivers were getting depleted quite a bit too by groundwater pumping. So huge, huge, huge issue. If you think about, on average in the past, upstream depletions in dry years were more in the 40-50% range, so 84%. And 2014 was another was an earlier record year, 70%. So we're looking at something really different now, and this helps to explain, I think, why we're missing our forecasts. Because, people would say, oh, the runoff's not materializing that we expected. It's not getting to the delta. We got to figure this out. So if this last year was the year that we kind of broke the delta watershed with the changes that are happening in our hydrology, I'd say last major drought was the year that we broke our groundwater systems, and that's what gave us sigma. So this is my third big difference of this year and prior droughts, is that we've got sigma now, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That is starting to slowly but surely reduce groundwater access. And it's important in this context to kind of understand that sigma gives local agencies 20 years to attain sustainability, but with guardrails. And the guardrails are really important. They are that you cannot be causing significant unreasonable, undesirable effects along the way. And that includes some of those things. When I say we broke groundwater last time, it includes causing other people's wells to go dry. It includes causing significant land subsidence. It includes causing significant impacts to surface water users and groundwater-dependent ecosystems. In coastal areas, it includes, causing saltwater intrusion, and it includes impacting water quality. So all of those things are things that already now, in the early days of implementation, these fledgling groundwater sustainability agencies have to keep an eye on. Not many places have pumping restrictions in place yet. I think maybe Don's area, not yet, you don't yet. Okay, but there are a few that have established allocations. The Tule Basin is one of them. We saw in the UC Merced PPIC analysis that actually you already do see some reductions in groundwater use in Tule, where they are worrying about subsidence and they are worrying about access to drinking water for disadvantaged communities. So three things. The hopefully just a temporary, really hard hit Northern California. The unfortunately not temporary higher temperatures and higher evaporative demand and thirstier atmosphere, and then the hopefully not temporary arrival of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the ability for, the tools that are empowering us to get a handle on our groundwater for the long term. With those in mind, I've got three or maybe four groups of policy priorities to think about. And the first one is just emergency safety net. So I was really glad to hear of the measures that are, under active consideration right now, let's say, in terms of thinking about, folks who are not covered by crop insurance, who are going to be hit hard by this. And it sounds like actually this may be one of those silver linings from COVID, that we've figured out how to do certain kinds of support programs and taking a page from that playbook. So that's, you have to look for silver linings where you can find them these days, right? So that's very encouraging, I think. The second bin, this is a harder one and a longer term one in a way, but it also relates to some of these long-term trends, is strengthening management of the Delta watershed. So in the study with Greg Gartrell and Jeff Mount, we highlight 4 policy priority areas, and you can read a little bit more in detail in the policy briefs that I handed out to you. But one that's really key, and it relates to growers, is better tracking of diversions and return flows. This is important. Michael George was talking about in the Delta, it's massively important upstream as well. And most of that water, there's some urban water in that, but most of it is ag, because it's really productive ag land, both in the Sacramento and the San Joaquin valleys. There's a lot of upstream water use before the water gets to the Delta. There's progress now with tracking diversions with SB 88 that Michael talked about, since the last drought, and some of the actions that the Water Board has undertaken to improve tracking of upstream diversions. What we're saying is we need something else. We need to keep improving that, but we need something else, which is return flows. We need to start tracking those in a systematic way. And right now that's not required for growers, but we are positing that is not going to be as heavy a lift as people might think, because there's already a lot of tracking for water quality purposes at this point of return flows, and there will be ways for large diversions and large return flows. That's going to be a not hugely heavy lift. For smaller ones, like in places like the Delta, where there's pumping out because the water table is so high, there are ways to use technology in the same way that OpenET is a technology kind of based way to do things. There's a way to basically use electricity measurements as a way to kind of track that. I know growers are not going to like this, but it's going to be important for understanding what water is available and really help better plan earlier in the year to be able to help manage risk, sort of having an understanding of what runoff is, how runoff is likely to behave. So this gets to the next piece, which is better forecasting of spring conditions. And DWR has already started down this path. It looks like there's more money in the budget potentially to help with this. What we mean by, why do we need to do this? I mentioned how, we've missed the mark in the last couple droughts with runoff and sort of how the snowpack was going to behave. And that's hugely important in terms of thinking about how we're going to plan the year. The forecasting has mostly been done based on the historical record. And so when you start having months that, we had the wettest year on record this year, we had the 3 driest months on record. When you start having that kind of stuff that is not in the historical record, it makes it hard to do that kind of forecasting. So, and there are workarounds which involve sort of synthetic, you kind of manufacture some scenarios out of, picking and choosing and combining in different ways. What that can allow is a better sense of what are the potential range of things. And then I'm trying to remember who this morning talked about, maybe Bryce, it was you, the planning, the sort of scenario planning that was done in partnership with the growers and the agencies, including, even Metropolitan Water District from down south this year. Having earlier, like planning for a drought every year and kind of looking ahead, seeing, okay, what are our potential scenarios, and then kind of knowing what are our decisions, what are the possible decisions as that unfolds, is going to be a really helpful thing for everybody in the kind of uncertainty that we're facing. At least it gives people some ability to start planning, and it gives people the ability to kind of know, okay, what's my likelihood of curtailment or of, getting cut down, because that's another part of the recommendation, which is we have to get more nimble at curtailing. And the Water Board has some authorities that it didn't have back in the last drought. And it doesn't need an emergency order from the governor for every single scenario of curtailment, but it doesn't have enough authority yet, we would argue, in that respect. And it's the kind of thing we're gonna be seeing more. It's in water right holders' interests to have a curtailment system that's working, and not have to wait and wrangle and have this stuff happen in August when it's too late to make a difference. Finally, we talk about simplifying the regulatory process for water in the Delta. Just a way of, it's really, we need the environmental regulations, not just for managing salinity, but also for managing for the ecosystem. Salinity is for water users. It's not just for the ecosystem, but we also need other protections for fish and aquatic wildlife. But right now, our system is very complex. And there are ways to kind of pull together the Endangered Species Act and Water Quality Control Plan regulations to make those work together. One of the key things we suggest is moving away from water year types as a basis for a lot of these regulations, because the water year types are kind of, they're not based on continuous hydrology, and you can have sharp changes in regulatory requirements for little changes in hydrology. And especially with the changes that we're experiencing now with our hydrology, it's much better to go with something that's kind of based on, okay, what are conditions now and over the last month. We think there's a lot of opportunity right now, given what's happening with review and updating of regulations. So then third group of recommendations is around Sigma, which is, let's not postpone it. We need it. If we want to have our groundwater basins for 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we've got it. It's important to manage it. It's really bad luck that we're having this dry period so early in Sigma implementation. In order to give growers the flexibility to use groundwater, more groundwater during droughts, they have to be willing to play ball and address the undesirable impacts. And that often is going to be cheaper to do by mitigating and, digging deeper wells for folks, those kind of things in a lot of places, than by just stopping pumping. In some subsidence areas, there's just going to be a need to incentivize those growers that are near there to not pump. Demand management was not the first line of action for the Sigma plans in the San Joaquin Valley. It's got to start to become on the front burner. There are a few of the basins that have started to put in place groundwater allocations. They're starting to look at flexible tools like trading, starting to look at farmland repurposing and how you get multiple benefits out of land that would be followed. It's really exciting to see what the Department of Conservation program has been able to kick off with that first round of block grants. I'll just note that in the San Joaquin Valley, the 3 basins that got block grants are all places that have allocations in place and that have already done kind of some of the homework and are ready to start piloting. So that's very exciting, and they're doing it with partners across the board. I hope there's more of that to come. And then, I had this as a Sigma recommendation. I had it as a Delta recommendation. So I'm going to just make it the 4th big recommendation, which is prepare for wet years. We've got to do better at improving storage. And that includes things like forecast-informed reservoir operations, which is in the proposed budget. It includes all of the kinds of things that Joe Yun was talking about in terms of both groundwater and surface water storage enhancement. It includes a lot of the other kinds of projects that folks have in their Sigma plans. It includes improving conveyance. We've just got to do a better job at it. We looked in the Delta study at the potential for increasing storage in wet years and found that, in those wet years, it's really hard to argue that you would be causing ecosystem harm by skimming off some of that water. And there's potential to do more, both in terms of exports as well as upstream in those years. So that's all I have for you in terms of remarks. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I'm sure we do. Chris and Joy?
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Alan. Always very appreciative and impressed by the work at PPIC, so thank you. Very, very informative. You made a comment earlier as one of your, I think, recommendations on just knowing what water is available, and I was looking at a recommendation in the paper on transparency and clarity to facilitate trading. And so the thought I'd like from you, and it could take the form of a potential policy recommendation in the future or just an assessment, pros or pitfalls, is, when you have technologies and you have groundwater sustainability agencies, and I'm in the Salinas Valley, so the Salinas Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency, many aquifers interconnected, and they're looking at tools such as, not too different from anywhere else, monitoring wells, right? Okay. That's a tool. But I'm hard pressed to understand, and this is where I'd like your help in understanding more, is why haven't tools such as like the INSAR satellite programming looking at just, the averaging of what's available in the basin in conjunction with groundwater monitoring so you can get a better picture of what's there. Why isn't that yet, or is it becoming more readily available, whether in a protected format to be used by GSAs for near-term, mid-term management decisions, or perhaps more broadly and radically democratized, so on a farm level basis, farming operations can actually understand, identify, quantify, and better predict, not only for that planting season and future planting seasons, what's the condition of this unseen, somewhat known resource just beneath their feet. I'm hard-pressed in understanding maybe my lack of knowledge on the delay to bringing that sort of utility or usefulness of that technology to market faster for those that are responsible for regulating, or those, such as farmers, that need to know for just making better business decisions longer term.
So I'm going to be at the fringe of my expertise here in my answers, so maybe others will be able to chime in. But if you're talking about the technology for kind of getting a sense of, groundwater levels and what's there, I know that the state has been supporting some, expansion of the knowledge base on that with flyovers across a lot of basins. And so that's information that is going to be really helpful, I think, to many basins around the state. To me, this is the kind of thing that is probably most appropriate at the level of your groundwater basin, rather than individual growers managing that on their own. And I say that because the very nature of a basin means that, what you use is connected to what your neighbor uses. So it's not, we can't just think about the groundwater as exactly what our groundwater is, exactly what's under our feet, because it moves around and it's shared basins. But it can be a very useful tool for the GSAs to be as part of their arsenal for understanding, what they're putting in, what people are taking out, and what's moving beyond those, inputs and outputs, and help to adjust along the way. Because I think a big thing with Sigma is going to be, these plans sort of say, okay, this is what we're looking at for 20 years, and they have some scenarios, but they can't foresee everything, and we're going to need to adjust. We get hit with 5 dry years, we're going to need to adjust. It turns out our basin is behaving a little differently than we thought, we're going to need to adjust. And so that's where, I would say growers should be pushing their GSAs to tool up with those kinds of things.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Earlier, Bryce, you asked a question which I think is germane again, and that is, how did we do during the wet winter in capturing water? And going forward, do you feel our forecasting is where it ought to be?
Okay, so I'm glad you asked that question again, because when Bryce asked it, I thought, I could give some insights from what we did in the Delta study. We looked at, so what we looked at in terms of storage and where there's potential, we looked in detail at 3 years, at 3 very wet years, 2011, 2017, and 2019. So in the spreadsheets that we posted, you can kind of see, you can look at those in detail, and there's, a lot on 2017 in particular. But then folks in the San Joaquin Valley who are working in a collaborative action program for solutions for the valley were very interested in, kind of knowing what's the potential to tap the outflow that's not currently needed for salinity management or for other ecosystem purposes. And so we looked at this past year for that purpose too. And first thing to note is that the reservoirs were empty. So a lot of that water just was half of it from the October and December storms just went right into reservoirs. Second is there were a couple of blips in, kind of in outflow, uncaptured outflow. I would say if January had stayed wet, there would have been opportunities for some significant additional capture, but the outflow that we got was pretty short-lived. The extra outflow that we got was pretty short-lived, and those first flushes are really important for the ecosystem. So it was probably not the right time to be socking a lot more of that away than we were already able to do with our reservoirs. Had we been lucky with the spring, with the 2022 months of the winter, then you would have started to see some opportunities for really doing more. And I'm happy to talk with you offline. Well, actually, you could even share some slides that we share with the San Joaquin folks, so where you can see mapped out. In comparison with a wet year, it was nothing.
I don't have any of the details, but I had heard that during December, there were opportunities, and whether that, I suppose it's debatable, but the plans from the state were challenged, and the pumps were shut off in order to address the challenge, and potentially up to 200,000 acre feet were not moved because of a challenge to the plan. Is there any accuracy?
Yeah, so there are
in
different
that?
numbers that are thrown around. One, I've heard a number that, what would, people like to sort of say, okay, what could we have done if, right? And so I've seen an estimate or heard an estimate that if there had been tunnels, that would have changed some of the pumping requirements and things, and that could have led to some more water being captured potentially. Then the other one has to do with some specific regulations, and that kicked in about halfway through the December storms. And if those had not been in place, there could have been some extra water. And this is where, had it just stayed wet for a bit longer, without having to change any regulations at all, that water would have been able to fill San Luis. One of the key constraints in a wet year is actually that San Luis Reservoir fills, and then there's conveyance capacity south of the Delta, but there's no place to park the water. So an important planning thing is to sort of look at where the smart plays in terms of investments to get that water, whether it's recharge projects, we are agnostic about the surface versus groundwater piece of it, but we will note that there's a lot of cheaper groundwater storage options out there if you can get the water to those places. So in the Delta study, we did not, we recommend a relook at regulations, but not just with the idea of increasing water supply for other users. It's really about how do you make that whole system work better for people and the environment. And there are probably times during dry years where we're going to need more protections rather than less. There are probably times in wetter years where we could be a little more flexible than we are right now with some of those regulations. The hard question is the in-between kinds of years. We haven't had very many of those. In the last above normal year we had was 17 years ago. So we didn't even, look at those because we don't have any above normal years with current regulatory requirements.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. So just on that note around the simplifying the regulatory process for the Delta, I was curious, you mentioned the Endangered Species Act and the water year types. Do you have thoughts on how you initiate, like what that process would look like and how you'd get something like that going in a successful way?
Well, so there are processes underway, and that's why that's why we think the moment is it's an opportune time to be looking at these things. The State Water Board has a water quality control plan update underway for the Delta, and the state and federal agencies are, I'm not going to use the right legal term, but they are in the process of, let's say, updating what the biological opinions and the incidental take permit and aiming to do that. in tandem. So it's an opportunity to kind of look at that together. And it's not like folks never talk to each other, but what we're saying is there needs to be much more intentionality there. And the water year type thing, there's a good precedent for that, which is the Spring X2, when that was established as part of the Bay Delta Accord and the change in regulations in the mid-90s. That is based on the prior month's hydrology. So that's, sort of where salinity needs to be in the delta. But unfortunately, we've got some other regulations that have come in that are not like that are, just very kind of rigid based on kind of, sort of step function type things. And they're not always that logical even. So those are things that we probably want to revisit. But that does not mean scrap them. It means let's be thoughtful about where you need things for ecosystem purposes that it's going to really provide benefits, and where you could be more flexible. Really thinking about the flexibility on both sides for the environment and for water users.
Right, so that'd be you sneak in under the wire every time.
Thank you.
But yeah, we're going to need to move on.
The return flows, are you thinking that those would be year-round or just summertime diversion and then what returns from the diversion? Or, like in our fields, all winter, there's return flows that are leaving after every rainy event. Are you thinking that those would be measured or just summertime?
You are again kind of taxing the limits of my, I'm an economist, and I work with all these technical people, and then I try to, be true to what they teach me. So Greg Gartrell would be the right person to ask that. Certainly in places that are actively pumping water out, that's going to be important to know, like in the Delta. Wastewater treatment plants, it's all year round. They're pumping out return flows. In the case of, I think what we're thinking mainly is sort of when water's diverted and what's going back out are sort of the key things. Part of it being that if you have those two pieces, that gives you a better way of kind of estimating what else is going on that you can't measure as well, to try to get the handle on the overall net depletions.
Yeah, I think about our fields, how they're laid out and things on how to do diversions coming in are concentrated, one diversion for multiple fields, but releases are much more individual fields.
But there may be, are they all releases to the river? Because what you don't need to
drainage districts, right? So
yeah,
maybe a drainage
right. So
district
there are
measure.
probably centralized places, Bryce, that could be. You don't need every field's measurements. You need the strategic places where the water is going back into the river.
I think you make a really good point there, Ellen. But what I am
I
kind
know,
of
you're-
amazed at is, and I think
not
it
happy
can be
about it,
done,
though.
right? The future involves change and better data, right?
It does.
And but I was a little bit amazed that diverters in the Delta can't even measure their diverted water. My brother and I were on the naughty list for not having a good enough water meters to and until we got, the ones that can measure kind of hourly diversions and get it on a smart stick and submit to the state water board with smart sticks or memory sticks, we were on the naughty list. And then to hear that there's diverters who can't even measure their diversions because they don't have sophisticated enough equipment to divert is kind of amazing.
Yeah. Well, we
And
got.
then we'd have to do return flows, but we can do it,
You
Ellen.
can do it, and it's going to be to your advantage ultimately. I mean, these transitions are hard, but then it's going to make it possible to no rhyme or reason during dry years, which right now we scramble. Every dry year, it's an emergency, and we're scrambling.
Ellen, thank you again. Always a pleasure to have you here, and I'm sure you'll come back again later.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Pardon me. Public comment. Do we have any members of the public that would like to address this agenda item? Any online?
For our online participants, if there are any members of the public that wish to comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. Seeing no public comment at this time.
Thanks again, Helen.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you. All right, we're going to move on to the tree nut sector market supply update. We have with us Bill Carrier with the Walnut Commission, Richard Montoya with the California Pistachio or American Pistachio Growers, Richard Waycott with the Almond Board of California via Zoom. So Bill serves as chair of the California Walnut Commission's Executive Committee and president of Carrier Family Farms. Richard is president of the American Pistachio Growers, a nonprofit trade association representing over 800 grower members in California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Richard Waycott is the CEO of the Almond Board of California, an organization dedicated to promoting almonds to domestic and international audiences, as well as funding and promotion studies on health benefits and sustainable agricultural practices. So welcome. Good to have you with us today.
Thank you.
So,
Guess I can go first.
thank you.
As Don mentioned, I'm Bill Carrier. We're hiring a new CEO for the Walnut Commission, soon to be hired. And so when the professional comes back, you won't have to see me, but I'm here representing the growers and handlers in the walnut industry. And I have good news and some not so good news. The good news, unfortunately, is that I won't talk a lot about water and the drought that we're experiencing, which is affecting walnuts. I'm not going to talk about Glenn County, where I live, and the rice we're not planting. And I won't talk about fertilizer prices and diesel prices. So with that, I'll give you a little background on the walnut industry. So California is the second largest walnut producer in the world, second only behind China. We are currently the largest, or the 11th largest crop in farm gate value. We've been in the top 10 before, but prices have been down, so we're now not in the top 10, unfortunately. We're the fourth leading California export commodity at $1.2 billion, and we provide lots of jobs. As you can see, 85,000 jobs is our estimate. And unfortunately, grower returns of the last, 2 of the last 4 years have been below the cost of production, and this year looks like it's even going to be worse. Again, a third year out of 5 below the cost of production. California acreage, walnuts, unlike rice, tomatoes that have been spoken about, row crops, et cetera, it's like turning the Titanic. It takes 7 to 9 years to get a walnut tree into production. So we have 54,000 acres still not in production that have been planted recently. Plantings have dropped off quite a bit because of the prices recently. But we still have a lot more crop coming into production. And this crop coming into production is, the newer varieties with higher yields per acre. And so it's going to go up more unproportionately, because the pounds per acre is going to be higher than what's been being removed. 66% of our crop goes overseas, and that's bringing problems because of the shipping issue, which is going to be my focus, unfortunately. That's the bad news. Global walnut production, next slide, Josh, please. Global walnut production has also been increasing. This slide's a little bit messed up, but...
Yeah, I apologize about that, though. The board has printouts.
Okay, great. Great. So as you can see, unlike some of the other crops, we face a lot of competition. We used to be number 1 in the world. As I mentioned, China is now the number 1 producer. And not only that, because we've done such a good job marketing, in my opinion, worldwide, the health benefits of nuts, and specifically walnuts, China took this as an opportunity to, and we raised the price worldwide. China took this as an opportunity to bring their farming population out of poverty. And so they really heavily subsidized planting of walnuts in China, especially in the Xinjiang region, which is more less traditional, more like what we grow versus mountain regions, which has been more traditional for China. So the world production is growing. China now produces, obviously, the most, and we're shrinking as a percentage, even though we're growing. On the export side, we are the largest exporter still, but our competition from China is starting to grow. Just 10 years ago, China was insignificant in shipping against our crop, 2 to 3% of their crop, and that was a much smaller crop. Today, they're shipping a lot more, and shipping about 17% of their total crop, and again, that's a larger crop. It's about 183 metric tons, and that's equivalent to what used to be our biggest competitor in Chile. That's more than Chile produces. So they're exporting more than Chile produces. And by the way, Chile's production is mostly exported. They consume very little in country. So hopefully you can see the graph there. It's just showing the steep increase in exports from China. So I lied a little bit about some of the other challenges that we are facing. There's lots of other challenges. I'm here today mainly to talk about the supply chain disruptions, but we do have a war in Ukraine, inflation, climate change, lots of tariffs and trade policy issues, currency devaluations, et cetera. But since our crop is 66% export, that's probably the major problem facing us right now. And it's eroding our ability to compete in the global market. Next slide. So as I mentioned, exports account for 2/3 of California's shipments. 100% of these shipments leave by containerized cargo, and the Port of Oakland is 99% of where they go out of. Just logistically, most of the walnuts are grown in the northern part of the state, so getting to LA Long Beach is quite expensive. In some cases, in the past, it was cheaper to ship something to China than it is to truck it to Long Beach. So Long Beach is not really an option. And walnuts are a little bit different than some of the other crops, tree crops especially, in that they're semi-perishable. If they're not in the marketplace in 12 months, and that's under ideal storage conditions, they start to go rancid. They're high in omega-3 fatty acids, which is one of the best positive things about walnuts, but also makes them more susceptible to rancidity. And so 12 months is about when you want to start consuming these things and not have any sitting around. 18 months if you put them in the freezer, if you have some at home. If you have some at home, throw them away and buy some new ones. So walnuts, also the other unique thing about walnuts is our major market in foreign countries especially is around the holidays, Christmas, Diwali, Ramadan, etc. And if we miss that critical window of shipping out in time for those markets, we're dead in the water. But then we suddenly have this huge glut to get rid of the rest of the year. And although walnuts are becoming more of a snack item, thank goodness, and year-round usage, it's still really important to get that cash flow going back to growers early in the season with in-shell shipments. And so this last year, when the shipping issue, I mean, we just came off of COVID and all these other issues, and then along comes the shipping crisis, and we can't get containers and chassis and congestion, and some of the shipping lines are not even stopping in Oakland. It really hurt our time frame of getting out for Christmas and the other holidays. So our in-shell product ships, between September and March, and if it doesn't get shipped by then, it ends up being shelled, which causes a glut in the shelled market. Next slide. So 23% of the crop is typically shipped in that September to March time frame, and this year we did a little bit more than half of that, 13%, because we're unable to meet those holiday shipment timings. So we lost about 70,000 tons worth of sales, and if people don't eat walnuts during that time, they eat something else. It's not like they're going to eat twice as many, come the next month. So those are lost sales, not just delayed sales, which is an important point. So some of the challenges we faced, lack of containers and chassis, which is the truck body that goes underneath the container. Outright cancellation of bookings. I mentioned that some of the ships aren't even stopping in Oakland. One of the issues is there's no railhead that comes straight to the port of Oakland. And so if you, and in my opinion, the ports are all about imports, not exports. They want to get, the stuff to Hobby Lobby and Michael's and all the stuff we bring in from China or iPhones or whatever to the rest of the country. So if you have a container coming in, it's going to go to Kansas City. It comes off of the ship. They have to put it on a truck in Oakland, truck it to the railhead, and then take it by rail to wherever it's going to go. There's not the sufficient infrastructure at Oakland to do it efficiently. Long Beach does have that, and that's why some of the shipping lines have pulled out of Oakland because they're concentrated on imports, and they know that there's no railhead there. And it's caused a lot of delays. And some of the containers get put on a chassis, and then they have to wait for the train, and then it uses up the equipment. So we can't even get chassis and boxes to get our cargo down there. Sometimes the books are overloaded, and so we get what they call rolled to the next ship, which sometimes can be a week, sometimes can be 2 weeks. Walnuts, again, perishable item. Where's that going to sit? Right now it's sitting in the truck yards down there because we'll ship it down. Let's say the booking is made for a Wednesday, and we load a container. We send a truck to Oakland, we pick up a container, we come up, we load it on Monday morning, and as it's driving back to Oakland, we'll get a message that they've rolled the ship. Well, we already have 10 containers on the road down there, and so we end up paying charges to park this container in a truck yard, or God forbid, get it into the port if you even can, and then the price is even higher. So you get demurrage charges on holding the container too long, you get demurrage charges on holding chassis too long, and then of course your product is sitting in Oakland, which is better than sitting in a hot weather, but it's still not ideal. So, and then rerouting cargo in transit. Because of our trade imbalance and other factors, it's an economic problem or issue for the shipping lines. It's about $20,000 that they're getting to bring a container from China to California, and we're only paying about $3,500 to take a container to Europe. And so a typical route of a ship will come up the coast, stop in Long Beach, pick up something, hopefully stop in Oakland, and pick up something, maybe go to Seattle, turn around, go back. And then they get down to the Panama Canal and they look at their cargo and they say, you know what, I've got 50% empty containers on my vessel, and I've got these 40 that are going to go to Europe, and I got to pay $1.4 million to go through the Panama Canal. I'm going to unload them in Panama, those 40, and I'm going to head back to China because I can get $20,000 for that container I can get back there in a week and bring it back and forth maybe 3 times, and it takes 30 to 40 days to go to Europe. So then the next ship will come down, do the same thing, and the next ship will come down and say, okay, now we have a sufficient number of containers sitting in Panama. We'll load them all on, we'll go through the canal, we'll deliver them to Europe. And it causes several problems. One, Panama, I've heard, I've never been there, but it's quite warm, and walnuts aren't good to sit in the warm containers down there. So you end up with claims from your customers of everything from bugs to rancidity, et cetera. And then secondly, your customers are counting on receiving 3 containers this week and 5 containers next week and 5 containers next week, and suddenly they got 15 that showed up all at once. Causes cash flow problems for them, causes warehousing problems for them. We're getting cancellations as a result. So it's causing lots of problems, despite the prices we're paying as well. So the consequences of this have been falling prices. We lost about 50 cents a pound decline for in-shell, about $1.50 for shelled. We have customers renegotiating contracts because of these price declines. They order something, it got there in 90 days. They ordered it for Christmas, it got there January 10th. They don't really need it. And not only do they not need it, the contract was for $3 a pound, and now they can buy them down the street for $2 a pound. So they're renegotiating contracts or just canceling contracts altogether. And unfortunately, there's a train coming from China that's bringing cargo. Chile is having similar shipping issues, but they're getting a few containers in, and so it's eroding our market share. And then, of course, I mentioned demurrage charge for holding containers that are waiting for shipment. So as a result, next slide. We're going to have a lot of carryout. I mentioned our normal carryout. When I mean by carryout, August or September 1st is the end of our year, starting a new year. And we normally carry out about 10% of our crop. This year, we're going to carry out 20% of our crop. And so that's going to further exacerbate the problem, both of, you're going to get some people trying to ship old crop into markets, which is going to not bode so well for us. Not to mention, we're expecting probably a record crop coming this year, despite trees being pulled out and drought conditions and other issues. So I don't see it getting much better next year unless we do some, we get rid of some of this inventory. We were just awarded a $30 million USDA buy, and the last thing farmers want to do is farm the government, but this is helping. We've asked for another one to try to alleviate some of this old crop, go into food banks and school lunch programs, et cetera. The financial losses, just to give you perspective, the $600 to $700 million just on the shipping issues alone, another $4 to $6 million losses due in the price drop. And those don't include the costs that I mentioned that seem small, but they start to add up for your extra port charges and, demurrage charges. And of course, the biggest one probably lost market share to competing producers. So our estimation is $1.7 billion in these last 4 years, in addition with trade and tariff barriers. Right now, there's a 100% duty for walnut, 120% duty of walnuts into India, for example, and 20% of that is a retaliatory tariff, and 100% is for all origins. But imagine we sell it for $1 a pound, they have to pay $2.20 to get it. So I guess, what am I here to ask, or what am I, besides just reporting some bad news? And I don't know what a lot the state can do, because this is a lot of it is international issue, but one of the concerning things we hear about is reducing some of the area at the Port of Oakland. They're talking about taking out the Howard Terminal and replacing it with a new A's stadium and some residential and commercial real estate. The Port of Oakland's already overly impacted with traffic. We encourage the labor unions they're about to renegotiate, the longshoremen are about to renegotiate their contract as well. We want to make sure that those go smoothly as much as possible so we don't have any interruption due to that. And then just efficiency of the ports, I think, is a big issue. I heard a recent talk on this, and the average time it takes to unload a container off of a ship and get it on a truck and out of the port, or not out of the port, but onto a truck was 73 seconds. And I said, wow, that's really fast. And they said, well, that's the Port of Oakland. And I said, oh, what are some another one? Well, Rotterdam is 23 seconds. Wow. Okay, so that's 73 seconds seems like a short time, but it's triple what it should be. So we need automation in our ports. We need a railhead into Oakland. We need to entice the shipping lines to come back and stop at Oakland, and just create a more efficient flow of goods. And I know these are long-term fixes that we can encourage, but we have a saying in the walnut industry, when's the best time to plant a walnut tree? 10 years ago. And what's the second best time? Right now. So hopefully we'll get going right now. Thank you.
Yep, go ahead, Richard. Thank you. We'll have questions at the end. Appreciate that.
Secretary Ross, President Cameron, Executive Director Eddie, and board members, great to be here before you. My name is Richard Matoyan. I am President of American Pistachio Growers. I want to give you a real quick, brief overview of the pistachio industry in California. And if I can have the slides brought up. I will just start off by saying that I will echo many of the comments that were expressed by Bill in the walnut industry. We are experiencing many of the same challenges related to shipping. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that the lack of water, this drought and sigma, will have a significant impact on all of our commodities. And I am talking to growers on a daily basis about their particular groundwater basin that they're in and restrictions that are in place for this year, restricting pumping to below 1 acre foot per year. That will have a significant impact on our commodity. Next slide. I want to give you a sense of pistachios. For many of you who are not familiar, pistachios are an alternate bearing crop, although that trend doesn't always follow. We've had multiple up years, multiple down years, but the trend generally is on 1 year, big crop, and off the next. We had our largest crop in history in 2020, yet that was followed by our largest crop in history in 2021. This year, 2022, was expected to be an on year, so we don't quite know what we're going to experience. We won't know until we get to really September and October. Next slide. If we look at this particular chart, if I look from 2003 back, there was only about 3,700 acres of pistachios planted per year. But if you look at more recent years, and really from 2012 to the present, with the exception of a couple of years, we've had over 30,000 acres per year planted, a significant increase compared to pre-2005, where we're only having 3,700 acres. We thought this trend had stopped, but in 2021, we saw it pick right back up to above 30,000 acres per year.
So, Richard, quick question. So the plantings in 2012 to 2016, is that what's the projected growth?
Yes.
On the previous slide?
Because pistachios take about 6 to 7 years to come into production, we're seeing this large upswing in production as a result of the plantings that occurred between 2012 to 2016. If we go to our next slide, you'll see the amount of bearing acres. And you can see this dramatic increase starting in around 2017 and going on through and beyond 2026. You only have to look back to 2005. We're only at 100,000 bearing acres. And by 2025, we will be above 500,000 bearing acres. So a dramatic increase in the number of bearing acres of pistachios in the state. Next slide. So what trend do we see? If we look at the two 10-year time periods, 2002 to 2011, and compare that with 2012 to 2021, 151% increase in acres planted during those two 10-year time periods. Next slide. And when we look at bearing acres, this is the more significant number, looking again at those two particular time periods, a 208% increase in the number of bearing acres. Next slide. So the next 5 years alone, we see that there will be a 28% increase in the pounds that are produced, from about 1 billion pounds to about 1.49 billion pounds. And you have to remember, it took this industry 35 years to get to 1 billion pounds. And we believe that in the next 10 years, we're going to hit 2 billion pounds. So a rapid increase as a result of that. This next chart shows our production in green, our shipments in blue, and the yellow line at the bottom being our carryover number. So you can see that generally speaking, we are shipping out what we produce within a given year. And what is not produced is generally carried over. I want you to pay particular attention to the far right and that yellow line, and it's creeping upwards. And this is really as a result of all this increased production that is coming in, and our ability, there is a desire and a demand for product, but it's our ability to actually ship that product and get it into the hands of consumers. So we do not want to see that little yellow line creep up much more than where you see it today. We have experienced our highest carryover in our industry. Next slide. This just shows where product is shipped. When we look at the United States, Europe, and China, those are our three biggest regions. And prior to the imposition of tariffs on our product in China, China was our largest export market, but now has fallen behind Europe. Next slide. So like walnuts and like almonds, the majority of our product is exported. We really focus and need exports to take up that extra demand in production that we have coming online here in the next number of years. The good news is that if we look at our current crop year, and this is from September 1, 2021 through April of 2022. So this is the most recent current data that we have. Both domestic shipments and export shipments are up, and you can see those numbers there. If we look at the next slide, you can break it down further by region. Asia is up, China is up, despite the tariffs. India is a burgeoning market, and it's up over 98%. The Middle East, which traditionally used to import much of their product from the country of Iran, but because of sanctions and the international monetary limitations, now they're importing product from the United States instead of Iran. And because of their proximity, China and Mexico are up. Our only down market is the European Union. So that's really good news there. We believe that's as a result of not only shipping issues, but pricing issues, and the fact that they were waiting to see where the price was going to end up, and they felt they had enough product already in that country to supply the demand. We hope that's going to turn around. I will just mention to you, for all these countries mentioned, that a lot of product is being shipped, not sold. So it's being shipped and staged in a given part of a region of the world. And it's being done because of these shipping issues. We don't want to miss a market and then miss an opportunity. So there are now areas of the world where product is being shipped and stored. My last slide that I have here shows world production. And as much as anything for our particular commodity, what happens in the world affects us in terms of what's being produced. The United States is in the blue color, and if you look from left to right, that blue continues to grow. The next line or next part of the graph is the orange color, and that is Iran. And that number is shrinking over time. While they have double the amount of bearing acres that we do, because of their drought and because of weather-related issues, they have remained stagnant or have gone down in their production. Turkey is in gray, and that's a market that is continuing to grow, although we don't believe that we're going to face a lot of competition from them because they're growing different varieties than what have traditionally been grown in the U.S. and in Iran. And then, believe it or not, Syria is the fourth largest market in the world, but we just don't believe long-term that's going to be sustainable. We see a lot of acres being planted in Spain and in Portugal, and we believe in the near future they are going to become competitors of ours. I will just add that while we see a lot of acres coming into production, I can't emphasize enough what impact the water will have, or the lack of water will have on our particular commodity. And while we are a drought-tolerant plant, like all plants, if you're able to give adequate supplies of water, they will produce more. The one thing that works in our favor is if you don't water certain perennial plants, they will die. Our trees will not die, they will just not produce a crop. So that's the unique thing about pistachios. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. We'll do, I know you had a question, Karen, do you want to wait till the end? Or? Okay. Yep. Richard, are you on?
I'm here.
Good to hear from you.
Hello, hello.
We don't
Sorry I
see
can't be there in person today.
No, good to see you.
Good to see you. So Secretary Ross and Chairman Cameron, thank you, and the rest of the board for holding the session today. There's a lot to talk about in our industry, and Bill and Richard did a good job on covering quite a few items. So I'll try not to repeat things. I don't have a slide on our industry. I think most of you are familiar with it, but we are about 7,600 growers now in the state. We produce 82+% of the world's supply still, so we're obviously the big kahuna around the world. And we've grown from 1 billion pounds 20 years ago to 3 billion pounds today. So about a tripling of the crop in that time frame. And that would be kernel weight, not inch shell weight. In terms of foreign competition, interestingly, I just got back from a trip to Spain and Portugal, looking at all the new irrigated sections of both of those countries. They're in a pretty aggressive planting campaign at the moment. Most of the varieties are not California grown varieties, they're Spanish varieties, but they've put in a lot of state-of-the-art plantations there now, and we expect the Iberian Peninsula as a whole to more or less double in production by, well, in the next 10 years, most likely. And then Australia continues to grow as well. So we estimate that our share of the market in terms of production over the next 10, 15 years will probably drop by about 10 points due to the increased production in those countries and a much slower growth for our industry here. I guess the way to characterize the last 18 months or so has been, this horrendous combination of drought, COVID, retaliatory tariffs still being in place. Obviously, this logistical situation that, again, Bill and Richard have discussed. We also export, 70% of the crop or more. So we're all sort of in the same boat. And 80% of our exports have traditionally gone through the Port of Oakland. So I addressed the Cortez Huller-Scheller co-op membership a week ago today, and I basically characterized our situation that we do not have a lack of demand around the world. We've done a great job of creating demand ahead of supply in most cases. And we don't have an oversupply situation in the world. But what we have is this logistical nightmare, and it's been with us for over 12 months now. It's created the same problems that have already been explained to you. And in our case, the backup of inventory coming off of 2 super duper crops has created a lot of downward pressure on pricing. And that is what we're having to live with. So Joss, if you want to go to the first slide, that's logistics crisis, if that's up. Yeah, the next slide there. So again, there'll be some repetition here. I'll try and avoid, but I don't think the other 2 speakers have mentioned, we have actually seen a little bit of an improvement over the last few months. We've had increased export shipments for the 4 months since January, and we expect a very good month in May shipments. So we are seeing a little bit of a relief in terms of increased bookings and equipment. The Almond Alliance of California, in conjunction with OOCL, has set up a sort of a prototype and sort of emerging possible capability for transferring containers from Oakland down to LA Long Beach as a means of getting more product out through that port or those ports. Mostly that would be directed at the Asian markets. But in addition to trying to improve service at Oakland, trying to find new ways of delivering product into Los Angeles more efficiently. The issues with the individual carriers and service to Oakland has already been mentioned. Continue. One recent piece of news was that Hapag-Lloyd, one of the major carriers around the world, has temporarily suspended their Oakland service. They're going through some global repositioning, the war, some new ships coming online. We expect them to come back, but that's the last thing we needed was another line to pull out. And then, as Bill mentioned, just this phenomenon of taking forever to book something, and then the booking gets rolled, or the ship gets canceled, or they give you 4 hours to drop off the container, and you can't make that window. That kind of thing that's going on. The dock workers strike, I think Bill mentioned also, or not strike, I should say, labor negotiations, not a strike, certainly not yet, but that has, I think, started off much better than it did a few years ago, and it looks like there's a lot of optimism that not by July 1st when the current contract expires, but certainly in the next, hopefully 2 to 3 months, they can reach a deal, and it looks like extending the current contract won't be a problem while they do that. And then lastly, there is, as you probably all know, this Ocean Shipping Reform Act that's in DC. The latest overnight was that it's actually going to be coming out of the House, I guess, and being taken up by the Senate, I think is the way it's going now, coming out of conference. So I think that we'll probably see something emerge that will come into law and get signed. Basically, as I understand it, they're very well intentioned. This act's well intentioned, doesn't necessarily have a lot of teeth to it, but it will certainly create incentives for the lines to carry export and I guess provide better treatment of detention and demurrage fees, et cetera, as part of that. We all know the shipping costs have gone through the roof, and that's not just on exports, but it's on crop inputs as well that are imported into the country. As I mentioned, administrative time. So the folks we have working on logistics that are handlers, just to book each shipment, as I mentioned, just takes so much longer. So a lot of excess costs there. And then, as Bill was saying, we do have a shelf life issue. Almonds aren't as subject to rancidity, not as soon as walnuts are, but they do have their limitations, and they don't like to sit in hot containers in tropical countries. So, there is more fumigation and more storage costs, obviously, with this bubble of inventory that's been created, and having to try and ship a container, bring it back, that kind of thing at the handler level. So the bottom line is we've had almond price degradation. Some of our lower prices have been seen in recent months, and that's attributed to the shipping delays and an inability to complete contracts in a timely manner. We also like walnuts and pistachios. If you miss the windows of consumption in India or China, those consumers aren't going to run out and buy the product when it arrives. You've missed the opportunity, so that is a problem. And then due to the inability to reach our customer base around the world in a timely manner, it stretches out the payments, obviously, back to the handler, which then causes cash flow issues, which are at a very critical level right now, where growers aren't getting paid for their shipments because they're taking so much longer to get to the market. So the inflow of cash they need to buy crop inputs, which have all escalated in price, is just sort of a really vicious circle that's occurring right now. So I think both on the growing side as well as the commercial selling side, it's fraught with logistical problems. We've seen a little bit of improvement in the last couple of months, and hope that continues. So let's switch to where we are as an industry in terms of acreage. This is the last 10 years. The green is bearing acreage. The blue is planted but not yet producing. So we still have a big slug of acres out there that'll be coming into production. As you can see, we've been sort of tailing off. I think with drought and with lower pricing, as usually happens, growers aren't running out and planting as many acres. So we're seeing a bit of a tail off there. And that will certainly temper, future production as that acreage slows down in terms of growth. Next slide. So looking at the last 20 years in terms of production, I sort of divided into these three phases of growth. And, we sort of had a long phase, the first 10 years, let's say, of pretty healthy compound annual growth rate of over 7%. Then we got in the drought years, that slowed things down. Then we came out of those and things picked up again. And then we just had this totally unprecedented past 2 years of the 2019 and 2020 crops where, combined, we increased 37% in production in 2 years. And for the size of our industry, that's pretty unheard of. And that 837 million pounds is slightly more than the entire consumption of the United States. So we had a whole nother US market in terms of production in 2 years that we had to deal with. Next slide. So this shows where we were last year, the green line in terms of year to date as we went through the year in terms of total shipments. The blue was the year before that, which was a record shipment year prior to the 2021 year. And then the red shows you where we are right now. So miraculously, we are a little bit ahead of the 1920 crop year in terms of overall shipments. And again, that was a record crop year at the time. So we're tracking to be the second largest shipment year ever this year, despite all of the issues that we've been confronting. So you can only imagine where we would be if we didn't have these logistical issues. We'd be certainly a lot closer to the green line. So we're hoping the next 3 months, which remain in our crop year, we'll see some pretty good numbers. And if you go to the next slide, you can see where sort of shipments have been going by region. The light green was the super duper year of 2020 crop, where we were able to ship. We had COVID, we had retaliatory tariffs in place. We didn't have the logistical problems like we have now. So we were able to largely market that crop, even with that 37% increase. This year, we haven't been so lucky, and basically I lay the fault of that firmly in the logistical issues we've had to deal with. Next slide. And then this has a lot of color in it, but we've got total receipts, total supply, total shipments, total carryout. So again, you can see how we've been able to more or less track supply and have demand there to take up that increase in supplies that's gone along. If you look at the sort of grayish, dark teal, I guess would be the right color, that's our carryout. And so we've had very good years of pretty low carryout. We start harvesting in August, but we don't really start shipping till September. And then a lot of it doesn't get on the water till October. So we sort of need 2.5, 3 months of inventory of the varieties and sizes and quality that the world wants to amply or to adequately service the market during those first months of harvest. So having, in our case, 500, 600 million pounds going into the new crop year is sort of minimum inventory. This year, we were talking about 1 billion pounds probably because of the logistical problems. That now is down to maybe 800 because of the increased shipments. And if we have some good months here, we might be even under that number. So that's in a little better shape than we thought, but it's still a historically a high number. And next slide. Just want to thank you for your attention. Happy to answer any questions. Again, I did address just to close, I addressed this grower Heller-Scheller group last week. And I said, so how do we move back to profitability? And right now, most growers are underwater in terms of cost of production. But in the short term, reach equilibrium as soon as possible. So get that ability to balance supply and demand and shipments in the right place as soon as possible. No magic wands there. But we do that by continuing to improve the logistics and working with the Almond Alliance to pressure the shipping lines, pressure Washington, et cetera, to take some action. Maintaining the strongest shipments we can over the coming months, working down that carryout, driving the ABC marketing machine. I don't think the other groups really mentioned a lot of that, but we're investing more. We increased our marketing budget from $52 million to $59 million during the year this year, just to implement more programs that would drive demand. So not taking our foot off the gas here and rectifying that imbalance. I think longer term, resolving these market access issues, these retaliatory tariffs, which are still in place in China and India and other markets, we've got to get rid of those. That's a real hindrance. At the same time that Australia has been negotiating free trade agreements or putting them in place with China, and now has one in discussion with India. So we can't let ourselves get further behind the ball here in terms of our competitive position around the world. And then, we'll probably have a slight slowdown in U.S. almond production growth, not shrinking, but growing more slowly in the coming years. So with that, thanks for the opportunity to address the board, and turn it back to the committee.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your presentation. As you can tell, the nut industry is not doing great right now. Big change from where it has been. So we'll go ahead and open up this for questions. And Karen, I know you've been waiting.
I have, because there are things that we learned during COVID and now this year, in between COVID and whatever's next. But especially on logistics and the situation that we've been in with the supply chain, of really understanding how each piece of this is disconnected and yet it's all very, very linked. And Richard, I picked up on this. You said this is shipped, but not sold. And I'm wondering, lessons learned about our supply chain, and I'm asking this for all three of the tree nut categories, are people looking at changes to be better resilient to future disruptions in the supply chain with regard to shipping, storing, and keeping control? Does that say in your chain of custody? Are these things you're all learning together? I'd really like to better understand that. If we want to really work as a state to reemphasize we're an export economy, and that's not a bad thing, we need to know how the rest of our commodities are thinking about this.
Yeah, obviously necessity drives innovation, right? And these shipments that are shipped but not sold doesn't come without consequences on the other side. So it's an opportunity to stage the product and have it ready. We have heard that in certain markets, buyers are aware that product is there and have put pressures on driving the price down. On the other hand, for other buyers, it's been an opportunity to pick up product very quickly, for otherwise they may not know when it's going to arrive. But it also comes at a cost. So that product has to be stored. In certain markets, it has to be, I don't want to say refrigerated, but not in, open conditions. Our product is fairly resilient, but it's not going to do well in humid, hot conditions. So it comes at a cost. But I wouldn't say any more than about 5%, to my knowledge, and this is all anecdotal, is being shipped in that manner. But there's a lot of talk within our industry about that as an opportunity.
Great. Bill or other Richard?
We've also talked a lot about that to our customers. We have some customers that are requesting consignment purchases, but for two reasons. One, so they can get the product on the water, even though we don't necessarily have a contract yet. To your point of control, that's scary for us.
Yeah.
And then the second reason would be then they have it there, and they can put downward pressure on the price. Walnut's a little bit unique in the fact that, again, we have to hit that certain window, so there's a lot of pressure to get it there, so it's there for Christmas, even if the price is lower. But then there's a rancidity problem if it sits, because it's out of our control, and then we don't know how they're storing it. We personally, just to use our company's example, we're securing some refrigerated, because walnuts should be refrigerated, cold storage space in Europe, for example, just to get stuff on the water. And so it's still under our control, and ship it there hopefully you can sell it while it's on the water, and then you don't have to put it in the warehouse. But we're making contingency plans to put it in a warehouse there if we have to, and then take advantage of somebody who's short, who didn't make that plan.
Yeah, Karen, I'd say that, I think all of our industries have had a lot of reckoning during the last many months, and we've talked about the same things. One thing, we're an industry with 100 handlers and then resellers and all that, and to do something on an industry-wide basis, we haven't really gotten our hands around how that might work, but certainly individual members that can do that have been doing it, and consider it possibly as a competitive advantage that they're establishing. So there's that. The other thing, which I'm certainly not suggesting, but is we don't want to end up with the wrong varieties in the wrong place, the wrong time, and or the wrong grades, and so that's an issue with the number of varieties we grow and the number of grades there are and standards and so on. Some people have suggested, well, maybe we should just ship field run almonds overseas and process them in the European market, for instance, and then we would have the ability to pack to spec over there for those folks and just get the inventory out of California when we can. Nobody's going to like that as an idea from a California standpoint to move production overseas, but I just want you to know that is being considered, because this, if things go back to normal, people start forgetting for a while, but probably this very tenuous supply chain situation is could occur due to lots of reasons that are outside of our control.
And then just one last question, because Josh has heard me say this. I finally got to go to the Dubai Food Show, and walnuts were there. But I noticed, Richard, I think it was your slide that showed the rapid increase in sales to the Middle East, and it's very real, it's very impressive, and it's the whole tree nut and dried fruit category, including California dates. They like California dates. And so when, as we try to do what we can to try to boost exports, however we can support that, understanding everybody's target markets and where they do see that growth, because of the incomes and growth, it's a crossroads with India, which I was very impressed with your numbers there, as well as Asia. Just see tremendous opportunities there. Plus, I've challenged Josh that we need to double the number of California groups that go to that show next year, because it's worth it. Sorry, Josh, I had to put my plug in. I'm on a mission.
I will just add that a lot of product does go through Dubai, but ends up in other parts of Asia, for mostly India and other parts. But a lot of product is going to Saudi Arabia, and for the first time, we are promoting in Saudi Arabia. So we see that as a great growth opportunity.
So Richard Montoya, I've got a question for you on, you're talking about staging pistachios in other countries. Is it one player, or is it the whole industry that's involved? Because they're all
Yeah, as you know, unlike other industries, we have 7 processors that represent 95% of the industry, and one of those 7 represents, in a given year, between 55 to 60%. And that large processor is doing the majority of the staging and shipping without having a sales contract on the other end, but many others are starting to do the same and have done the same. But it's been primarily one.
And the opposite of that is the walnut industry, where we have a Liars Club meeting that nobody has control of anything.
Well, Bill, I didn't want to ask this question, but, with the walnuts, it kind of reminds me of the prune days, when, you couldn't get rid of a prune, and they ended up having a tree pull to reduce acres. I mean, What's it going to take to get the industry, I guess, more into balance?
Sadly, we participated in that whole program and put walnuts there. So,
So now we need to take the walnuts out and plant the prunes?
yeah. No, we're going to pull them out and put pistachios in.
I know they are.
That's a great question. I think, like the almond side, Richard mentioned that there's a little bit of an oversupply of walnuts in the world, but really, if we had the shipping thing figured out, we have enough demand. And I mean, I've had customers ask me, what's the cost to the grower? What price do I need to pay so the grower makes some money? They don't need to make $1 a pound, but let's make a decent return. And so I told him, he said, well, I'm willing to pay that. And so that's not the problem. The problem is all our competitors don't get together and kind of raise that price. Growers constantly ask me, well, my diesel price went up. How come you can't just raise the price? And it's really the competition. So I think if we get the logistical things figured out, that's our competitive advantage, because California delivers what they say, they deliver on time, they honor their contracts, they don't cancel contracts, and so if we get
And
the
they have
shipping
a quality
thing fixed,
product.
and we have a quality product, yes, and everything else being equal, we win. So if we can get the shipping issue fixed, and of course we have all those other things that I showed on my slide. Let's fix the tariffs and everything else too. But if we get the shipping issue, we wouldn't be in an oversupply situation here.
I really appreciate the presentation from you gentlemen, and I just want to say that, as I operate around the country and around the world in feed ingredients, livestock feeds, let's just say proteins, we're in a protein shortage on a global basis today. These prices of these nuts today are one of the cheapest protein sources on the planet of Earth. And so I want you to think about that, and we're having these conversations because we know what it takes to do this. Every input into these nuts is up. Water is precious, and it's going to be hard to come by, and I'm telling you, we need to look at that, because we talk about this at Water Commission, I don't believe the nursery growers and the people planting these things are paying attention to the map of where the water is and isn't. I mean, I think they're starting to now, but I've run into some very shocking large plantings where there's no water, okay? And I mean, it's pure groundwater that is on its way to minimal amounts. So I think we're going to have a relatively epic come to the party for a lot of growers when they realize what's going to happen productively to these crops. Costs are going to be unbelievably high. We haven't seen it tail through. If we have this again next year, you're not going to believe what these things are going to be worth. And so I think some of the marketing that you need to think about is these nuts are too cheap today. And we have parts of the world starving. We've got 800 million people with under 1,200 calories a day. We're about to go to 1.5 billion, maybe under 800 calories a day. So understand your supply, understand how you do these. I love the idea of basically having some product on spec in some of these locations. If you can run that in a very sophisticated fashion where you know who and where and it's somewhat, you're secured, I think you want it there because people are going to need it. So I think it's going to be very difficult, but there are some encouraging options for your industries in front of you.
If I may add to your comment, we are now conducting a study where we're utilizing Land IQ to identify all the pistachio acres, which they have already done in a previous study, but overlay that with water districts, especially those federal and state water programs that have been cut back, but also overlay that with the Sigma basins so that we can have a more definitive view of how many acres, where are they located, and then try to figure out exactly what that impact is going to be. And that hadn't been done before, but it's something that we're doing. We should have those results by the end of July. And I'd love to come back and share those with you.
I think that's great. Executive Director Yun, we talk about this, which is, we have to be productive. We can't have unproductive acres. We're going to have to make decisions about this plot versus this plot because, once again, water is very precious. And I think CDFA, Water Commission, industry, we all need to come together. We need to do the math about where is the water and where can you grow what. And we talked about it before the break. And it's almost like we need a planned development of the Central Valley. And there's places that are appropriate for permanent crops, and maybe there's places that are appropriate for annual crops where you can come in and out. And then we kind of overlay what do we need to solve all these problems. So I think this is an area that the state could maybe come in, partnering with industry, and we could actually make some smart decisions for the future.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay.
No, not only that, but I think once you see groundwater trading down the road come into play, you're going to see the real value of water. And I think it's going to shock a lot of people when it does happen. Bryce and Patricia.
Yeah, well, I want to thank all the presenters. It was very informational, especially for me coming back to California after 20 years of being out of the state. So I went for the very first time to the World Ag Expo this year, and I was amazed about the technologies, and especially the technologies of climate smart technologies applied to tree nuts. And I was wondering if the three boards or commissions they have, what percentage of the growers are using technology that is climate smart, and is it related to water, and if there's data or results, are we seeing any benefits to it, and how you are moving forward?
Yeah, I don't have the statistics exactly in front of me, but I know we've reduced our water usage 30% over the last number of years. I don't know the exact number of years, but yeah, we used to flood irrigate everything, and tailwater was going everywhere. And now everybody's on either microjets or drip, and so we've reduced water use, reduced chemical use, and just becoming more efficient. I mean, we've been forced to because it's so expensive. I mean, we're doing it for multiple reasons, but yeah, we're being very proactive with that.
For pistachios, since we're a relatively new crop in California, probably 99.5% is already on drip or some sort of fan jet irrigation. Beyond that, all of our commodities are highly mechanized, which is why I think you've seen this transition from more intensive ag into the tree nut commodities. And as I talk with growers, more and more of them every day are trying to apply even more water management probes, moisture sensors in the trees, insect technology, puffers, any number of things to be smarter, faster, better than they've ever been.
I just add that yeah, very much so, and depends how you define climate smart practices, but certainly with cover crops, with the irrigation improvements that we've talked about. We also have developed the science around whole orchard recycling now, which is taking the trees when they're at the end of their life and incorporating them back into the soil for all sorts of positive reasons, in addition to carbon sequestration. So doing a lot of things. And one not untold story, but little told story, I think, is the amount of solar panels that have gone in over the last 20 years in our industry, and how much of our diesel and electric costs are now, either offset or being generated by the industry, which has been a tremendous investment in that technology. So yeah, lots of neat things going on, climate smart things. We also applied for the grant, the USDA $1 billion climate smart initiative. We put in a $90+ million grant proposal for that. So hopefully we might get some of that money, but yeah, we're very involved with all that.
So Richard, you didn't give your statistic. 33% less water use with a sustainability goal to reduce your water use by another 25%. That's almonds, the almond portfolio.
Well, Bill sort of stole my thunder there because he said 30% last 2 years. So, yeah, we've done the same through through transition to drip agriculture or drip irrigation, pretty much. Thanks, Karen.
And Bryce, you had a question?
Yeah, I was, thank you for your presentations. I was wondering if you could comment on all three of the nut crops. And by the way, what beautiful crops, really. Is there a better food? Okay, there's rice, but okay. What a better food than walnuts and pistachios and almonds. There's certain media voices in California that want to characterize exports as a bad thing during a drought. And how is it that maybe are you concerned about those voices? Are those just tiny kind of background noise, or and how is it that we can, or maybe how do you recommend, or how do you kind of counteract that really exports are a wonderful thing, and in all sorts of industries in the United States we want to promote exports and share the wonderful products that we produce here in California.
Well, I might jump in on that, since almonds have been the most vilified of any product grown in California, I think, for water over the last 2 droughts. I think, when you really look at the impact of some of these very negative things, they might affect consumer attitudes and purchasing patterns a tiny bit, but generally speaking, they are, good headlines, or they're just part of a reporter's sort of playbook. And we've found through our consumer research and so on that not to be ignored certainly, but that they aren't that decisive in terms of buying behavior. We've sort of taken a different, very quick story, since Karen mentioned Dubai. So I was just there also for the International Tree Nut Council annual get together, and the chairman of the almond board, Brian Walbrink, and I had a couple hours one afternoon. We went up to the top of the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, and we're in the elevator, and there's a couple of little group of Americans next to us, and where are you from? California almonds. And Brian happened to have a California almond shirt on, and of course, what was the first thing they said? Almonds use a lot of water, don't they? So we've sort of come to the decision that, trying to debunk that through talking about our water use efficiency and all that, it really doesn't resonate with the general public at all. So we're really taking a different tack, which is saying, what are all the things we do with the water we use? Because the gallon per nut was totally miscalculated, because the kernel is only 30% of what we grow in an orchard. So we've got 70% of hulls and shells and wood that same water is producing. And so we're really taking a different tack to educate more on what are the wonderful things that the water that we do create with the water we use, and what are the benefits in terms of carbon and protein, to your protein point, and the other attributes of our crop that water produces. And the export story, that comes and goes a little bit. Obviously, our trees release into the atmosphere 90% of the water they use, so it's not being exported in that sense. But that has not been a major impediment for us to sales or to consumption.
And for us, I think we want to and need to and do focus on the nutritional value. I know all of our nut commodities have a lot of similarities to them, in fiber and in protein, and then we have our own individual characteristics. But 6 grams of protein per serving is an incredible amount of protein, and for certain parts of the world, like India, which is vegetarian, having a commodity, a product that is so high in protein, is an incredibly good selling point. So we have to avoid some of the noise that's out there and focus on all the beneficial aspects of what we have and provide as a commodity.
Yeah, not to repeat, but I do the same thing we did with the rice. We tout the habitat that we created and kind of focus on the positives rather than the negatives.
Richard Waycott, when I grew up, it was a a can a week is all we ask. I was wondering how many pouches a week are we now?
Well, that was Blue Diamond's iconic advertising campaign back in the day. Yeah, we've gone from that time. I think we were probably at about, how many years ago was that? 30 years ago or something? We're probably at a half a pound per capita. Now we're 2.5 pounds per capita in the U.S. So that's been the growth there. And what we promote is an ounce a day, so 23 almonds a day.
All right. I think that brings our meeting, well, public comment. Before we wrap things up and go to discussion, do we have any public comment in the room for anyone on this topic? Online?
For our online users, if you'd like to make public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
Thank you, Josh. So this brings us to discussion and any recommendations. And thank you. Yeah, apologize. Gentlemen, thank you. Your presentations were very appropriate, very good to hear. And we know that the nut situation in California will change, as it always does. So thanks for all your input today.
Thank you.
So Don, I have to leave, but one comment. I think Richard's correct. That it's probably not worth getting into a fight over water imported, exported, et cetera. But I have long thought that California, given its extreme appetite for electronics of all sorts, is almost undoubtedly a net water importer, because these things take a lot of water to produce. And we don't make them here, we import them.
Couldn't agree with you more, Linda. I've used that argument myself, but you're right. The virtual water, I think we're a net importer.
We have to be.
Yep. All right. Board discussion, recommendations.
Could I actually bring one item up first, just since Glenda is still here? Our next meeting, as a reminder, is scheduled for July 5th, the day after the holiday. And so I'm just making sure that there is a commitment by board members to attend, so we do have a quorum for that meeting, or should we consider canceling?
Let's not plan it down. No. Barbecue, my house.
Corn on the cob.
Well, I've already got a plane ticket to fly home the night before, so I can.
All right. Well, we're here. We're doing it then.
All right, that's fine.
So I'd have
All right.
to change my ticket to stay longer there.
But, you know, before I get into the discussion and recommendations, I really want to thank Matt, Kimberly, and Joe for attending today. And I think we were extended an invitation to join the Water Commission's, I don't know, next meeting or a meeting in the near future.
I don't know what your rules are, how many people
I
can
don't know
come,
if
so
that
it's not a
works.
CDFA meeting.
I think a couple members.
I'm going to clarify.
Yeah. I'm like, we have a really big room though, so it'd be great to have you all.
Yeah, I think just a functional piece, when we try to get our boards together, if we invite you and you can show up in less than a quorum, it's easier for us to make decisions and do our business, and when we don't have two boards trying to make decisions. I think that's how your executive officer and director have talked about it. So it can be some sub-quorum from this commission or this board.
And maybe we pick somebody out of the water committee or.
But we're starting
Because we need to.
in July, we'll start the 6-year drought conversation, and all of this is very pertinent to that. And it would be great to have, because we're talking about wildlife and fish and how do we protect them in a 6-year drought? And our farmlands are those kinds of places where there's habitat. So I think it's important to include that in the discussion and to have someone there to, stakeholders be represented.
Can you tell us when your meetings are usually held?
Yeah, we are the third
Wednesday.
Third Wednesday. I went on vacation and just had a
I know.
moment there. Third Wednesday of the month.
Don,
go ahead, Mike.
during lunch, I was talking to Joe and Michael about those 7 projects, they have to go through the permitting process. I just wonder if we couldn't work together with the water commissioners and try to help these projects through this, because what could happen. I mean, there's a timeline now; those things can get pushed out.
No, you're right.
Or not happen.
Easily, and not happen because of that, right?
But I know Secretary Ross is working with the various boards, but I mean, it's not going to be an easy process to get permitting for these projects.
Very true.
Is that the right, Mike? I don't know if there's something we can do to, maybe there needs to be a little.
Yeah, cutting the green tape, and I don't want to get into other people's lanes. But getting these permitted is a very high priority, and there are many resources. For example, sites, and that's a huge project that takes a lot of people, takes a lot of time, and it's a very high priority. And I think this recent drought is really raising the profile of that. There are discussions about future projects and are there opportunities for streamlining if it's in line with cutting green tape. The other thing that's going on right now that our former colleague Ashley Boren and Sustainable Conservation did on programmatic EIR for restoration projects is something that people want to learn from and apply that. But it's going to be a very delicate balancing act. And so I don't think there's anything that can be said here to enlighten that, other than people are very aware of the permitting issues.
So I think if I could offer some perspective too, I think, we've discussed, the importance of drought for several years. There's a lot of the same issues, and just like Ellen talked about as well, I mean, there's some of the same trends that kind of continue. And I think one of the things we've learned through our communications with Australia and even our engagement with South Africa, there was day zero. There was a national commitment in Australia to say, look, we need to move on this action because of the challenges that were happening. It seems like we can start to make the case more and more that we're now in a situation where we need to prioritize and have a greater focus on the implementation of those products than we have in the past because of the challenges that are there.
I would say, given the meetings we've had the last 2 weeks and our drought task force, that is very much a focus.
Do you see any way we can help push that along, or a letter to the governor?
To reinforce, yeah. It's always better to ask for something specific.
I know what Bryce will ask for.
Well, sites, he's already for it. He said it over and over.
No, seriously, I mean, if there's anything we can do, I agree with you. I think these need to be I know you're telling me that they're prioritized.
Yeah, and I do think these kinds of discussions about 6 years, I mean, this is on top of 5 years with only a 3-year break. This is driving it home. And right now, the focus is on driving the sense of urgency with the general population, because the numbers, and I haven't seen them come out for sure, but it's not going to be a positive story on just water use generally. And so that's become a very high priority. What's proposed in the budget and what's under negotiations is going to bring more resources to all of the above. And then just because of what you all are doing, what DWR is doing with State Water Resources Control Board, on how do we prepare for this being something that we can't just wait and treat it as a drought. We have to be constantly prepared for drought and constantly prepared for floods. And so it's a change in how we're organized and bringing the resources together in a more integrated way to address that. So, I think we need to look at the makeup of the water subcommittee, because I don't know that we have very many members left on that, and maybe that's a step number one.
No, I agree.
To that extent, I was speaking with Joy last night, and she wanted me to flag what my conversation with her, which is there's a really great data collecting. It measures all sorts of perils on extreme weather, hydrology, wildfires, and it gives two scenarios. One where we reverse climate and draw down emissions, a more optimistic scenario, and then another scenario where we continue business as usual. And so it offers, like, they do deep analysis with the latest climate knowledge and data based on like the IPCC report, but they're also mining data that's open sourced to look at large land areas, what land will look like in the next 5, 10, 15, 20-year scenario. So if that would be helpful at all to connect this board with Jupiter Analytics, that team, maybe they could even come and present. It's just like overall deep data and knowledge on California, maybe in its entirety. I don't know if they've scoped particular states.
I just want to chime in on that, and the reason why that really
Have your mic on?
why that caught my attention last night is that it seems as though our forecasting, because everything is so dramatically different and it's based on historical trends, we could just throw it out the window.
But that's the budget last year and this year is making considerable investment, because with the lack of runoff, everyone realized modeling is built on history. And so forecasting, trying the new technologies is a huge emphasis, and that's where the budget dollars are going to try to improve that very, very much.
Perfect. And exactly. So this is the way we're thinking. So if this is another organization that has maybe a different outlook than, unless the state is already considering what they're doing, it just seems as though it's an opportunity to look at something.
And they may be, that's a DWR thing, and there's lots of different layers.
Yeah, that was our last briefing that we had at our last meeting, was about that forecasting. So actually, the last couple, we've talked about that in the update, so.
Dawn, just very thankful for all the funding that the administration has focused on drought and on just every aspect of what is needed, and where there are, well, just from the communities that are at risk to regions that are at risk to the environment. I was just wondering if we could express our appreciation to the administration for their focused effort in this regard, especially, that they could focus those funds in all sorts of areas, and that they would be this focused on this is great.
I don't know why we can't do that.
Hopefully it will get done. It's not a done deal. It's been
Yeah, I
proposed.
was going to say, we may want to wait a little bit before we get to that letter, but I agree with you, Bryce. There's been a tremendous amount of money focused on solutions in California for the drought. But yeah, let's get across the finish line, and hopefully it'll all be there, maybe more.
I do think the point that the chair mentioned is something I've been thinking a lot about, and that is, what does the Central Valley, Imperial Valley, and Central Coast, the primary, and Sacramento Valley look like land-wise? Because it is, I believe there's state benefit in having annual cropland stay in annual cropland. It is the only flexibility we have. And land use doesn't happen in a regionally strategic approach. And when I look at the warehousing space that is going on ag land everywhere, I don't think we can wait a lot of years and say this is something we should do. I think there's a place for the board to play in that.
Well, what does it look like, and what do we want it to look like? I mean, I think
Scenarios.
those may be two different things.
Yeah, their largest clients are actually insurance companies and the oil and gas industry. They're like doing scenario planning.
Anything else? Hearing none, I guess we shall adjourn. I know we went along today, I apologize, but I thought our presentations were excellent, so. Thank anybody who's still remaining online. Appreciate the you hanging with us today. Long day. And we are adjourned.